Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. This is the World Puja Network, and this is Dr. Greer, and I'd like to thank the wonderful people at the World Puja Network for hosting us every 2 weeks here to give you an update on what the Disclosure Project and the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence is doing, as well as the OrionProject.org energy projects are doing. And I'm joined today by Linda Willitts, who is here to discuss some very interesting subjects, and she's been working with us for over 12 years, 13 years on these projects, and is extremely knowledgeable. And thank you, Linda, for being here.
You're welcome.
So one of the things that comes up frequently, Linda, is this whole question of different kinds of ET life forms, and many people will ask, well, gee, are they all humanoid? And they don't really use that term properly. So I want to do some definitions first. The ET life forms that our contact groups have experienced and seen, and as you're going to hear about, photographed, are all humanoid in the sense that they are 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and a torso, and are upright. And this seems to be a morphogenic field, as Rupert Sheldrake would call it, where apparently the universal concept of man, and by man I don't mean the gender male, but man as in a universal symbol, the kind of symbol that Leonardo da Vinci put inside a circle that showed man, that is like a 5-pointed star. If you look at a 5-pointed star, you got a head on top, 2 arms, 2 legs, and that's considered the most sacred universal symbol, by the way, is the 5-pointed star for that reason. And I think that this is a universal morphogenic field that works, and once, according to the Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic field theory, is that because the whole cosmos is awake, and because the whole universe is a conscious quantum hologram where the fullness of intelligence is present at every point in space and time, that when a certain pattern begins to evolve and work, it then gets replicated at remote places without any linear contact. It's sort of like the 100th monkey phenomenon, where an island with a group of monkeys learn a new social skill or hunting skill or what have you, and they will find that at the same time a group of monkeys on another island that had no direct contact begin doing the same thing, that there's this sort of collective great conscious integrating switchboard in existence that integrates everything happening, and that when something works, it replicates and is used at remote places. And it seems that higher intelligent life forms, rather than being, like a circular jellyfish or what have you, tend to be these humanoid in shape. Now, what's interesting is that what we've experienced, and I have also heard this from people who've worked in classified projects that have been present at the retrieval of extraterrestrial bodies when we have unfortunately shot down using electromagnetic weapons some of these spacecraft, that the bodies that are retrieved may be very small or very tall, or various skin colors or even types of skin, and various facial structures, and hairless or with hair, but that they all are humanoid. They have a head, 2 arms, 2 legs. So when I say humanoid, I don't mean human-like. I mean that morphology, that shape. So I want to get that definition out there, because many times people will say, well, was the ET humanoid? And they mean looking just like a human, and that is not what humanoid means. So definitional requirements are very important, so we know we're speaking the same language. So when I say humanoid, I just mean a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso. Now, within that, there's enormous variation. One of the Disclosure Project witnesses back in the 90s had told me that they had learned that there were several dozen different planetary species that over the years had been cataloged in classified projects that dealt with retrieval of extraterrestrial vehicles and in studying this issue. And of course, in the pop culture, everyone thinks of the big bug-eyed grays or the reptilians, which, of course, ironically, are the ones that are man-made program life forms that are genetically created creatures. And many people that have worked in those projects have come forward to describe to us exactly how that's done. So the irony is that the public perception of ET is actually the disinformation man-made image, and the actual ETs that have been retrieved aren't very much like that, although there are a couple species that might roughly fit into the shape and size of what might be called quote-unquote a gray or what have you, but that they are more than just that. There's a whole range of beings, and some of them obviously have descended from different types of creatures to begin with. For example, and this is where this conversation gets very interesting from a anthropological point of view, and then trying to extrapolate that to what we know from extraterrestrial studies, both with what we've done and also in classified projects with some 550 military and intelligence and corporate people that I have spoken with and interviewed over the years. And what I have found is that while there's no doubt that humans, now I'm not saying humanoids, but Homo sapiens, humans, have descended from, or certainly have a genetic shared root with primates. We have 98 or 98.5, depending on who you read, percent. So some 98% of our genetic code is identical to a chimpanzee or a gorilla. Now, that's a lot, but still, that 2% is also a lot. And that is the big question of how did the 2% come about? Was it all purely evolutional, or was there also some intervention? I think it's both. And secondly, what does it mean that Homo sapiens have descended from primates? And I think that the primate studies that are being done around the world, pioneered by people like Jane Goodall and others, but more recent studies that have been done are very interesting, because what's being found, although some people don't like hearing this because they always have this idea of quote-unquote the noble savage, is that the many primate species organize not only into tribes, but engage in intertribal violence. And in fact, it has been recorded that chimpanzees and others have organized into warfare. Now, it's been pointed out that may be due to the stress of a shrinking habitat and things that are being imposed upon their environment by humans. But nevertheless, the question becomes that the facts are what they are, and that is that primates are noted to kill each other. Now, what's also interesting when you look at that, because this is the bane of human existence, is prejudice and fear of people who are different from us, and, of course, various forms of racism and misogyny and bigotry and separation and what have you that has led to organized warfare around various differentiating qualities, whether it be skin color or religion or ethnicity or what have you. But that there is a root for that within humanity that has to be transcended, that is probably carried over from our connection to our very roots, as 98% being identical with primates. And this, of course, is always the big question of our overcoming some of the aspects of humans that are within all of us and that we have to overcome and control and find ways to resolve that are nonviolent and doesn't result in massive warfare now that we're in the era of weapons of mass destruction. So this is a very, very interesting discussion, and there have been, of course, many books written on this issue. Now, if you look at this, though, in terms of other phyla of animals, let's take, for example, canines. Well, dogs, for example, and wolves. Now, it's interesting because years ago when I was in college, I read a very interesting book about wolves, and how malign they were. And, of course, many people say, oh, my God, that person's like a wolf and this and that. But in reality, wolves don't kill each other. They may have a pecking order with an alpha wolf and a omega wolf and a beta wolf, and they may attack an intruding wolf just to teach it a lesson. But actually they don't go to the point of killing each other, whereas the dove of peace, will peck each other to death. So what's interesting is that even within the human sort of prejudice of other species, there is this tendency to assume that wolves are violent and doves are not, when in reality doves have been known to be so territorial as to kill each other, their own kind, whereas wolves do not do so. So should it be the wolf of peace instead of the dove of peace? It's very interesting. Now, I throw out these issues not just because I tend to be a bit of a contrarian in terms of what conventional wisdom in society is saying, but also to bring up this question of what does it mean that there are civilizations from other planetary systems, I have been informed, that have evolved from a lineage for which there's no concept of violence amongst themselves and or the concept of warfare. Very interesting question.
You know, one thing that I'd like to interject here is that people might be thinking, well, wolves do kill prey, so do cetaceans kill their prey, and sometimes they even act together in groups or packs to attack their prey, but that's a whole different thing. That is not warfare, that's eating, and they happen to be predators, and that's their food.
Right, it is
a very
different
deal.
Every living animal eats something, even if it's a plant. And, of course, they found that plants have a certain consciousness about them, although I think it's certainly more grievous to kill a higher intelligent animal than a carrot. Nevertheless, the question is, your point is exactly correct, that many animals will organize into hunting packs to feed themselves, to survive, but it isn't done for the sake of killing. It's to survive. And as opposed to territorialism where there's murder or organized warfare within the species, which humans do. And also, quite interestingly, it's now being established that primates do. Even if there are environmental stressors that have led to that, that's beside the point. They still engage in that. Whereas you don't see that. I mean, you don't see dolphins killing each other. You don't see many other species doing this. And so we know that this is part of the real challenge of humanity, is to transcend into a higher state of spiritual awareness to control those proclivities so we don't engage in not only murder of people, which as an emergency doctor I used to see with great frequency in the ER. Under the most ridiculous circumstances, people would come in having been murdered or severely attacked and then subsequently die for the most trivial reasons. But also you see nation-states and city-states and tribes going back many thousands of years organizing into organized murder, which is, of course, warfare. And I think that we have to understand that there are civilizations that exist that are interstellar, that have evolved from lineages that don't have that concept at all, in the least. Now, of course, everyone gets trapped into Star Trek and Star Wars and whatever the movie du jour is, where it's one rampaging Klingon after another fighting each other. But that's much more of an anthropocentric projection, where we're projecting our own baggage, as it were, into space, than the apparent order that's out there. And I think that we have to take a look in the mirror. In fact, I think that it's very interesting that a lot of the way people will assume that our interstellar extraterrestrial visitors are violent is much more of a statement about ourselves. And it's basically the way people regard this entire subject, I think, is a giant, not only a Rorschach test, but a big mirror that reflects more about what the person is about than what is actually being intended. Because obviously, if you go through an analysis of this, any civilization capable of going faster than the speed of light, dematerializing at one point in space and rematerializing light years or galaxies away at another place like Earth, their technologies are so advanced that if they were inclined to weaponize them and be hostile towards, say, a planet like ours that's beginning to go into space with weapons and has killed almost 200 million of our own people in organized warfare in the last 100 years alone, that doesn't count the murders, the individual murders that have happened, that such species who have that capability, if they were truly hostile, would have used that proclivity with that technology, and we wouldn't be breathing the free air of Earth today, 60 years after the dawn of the nuclear era. So I think that one of the interesting things, though, is to consider the fact that in our Sea City expeditions and also in interviews I have done with classified military personnel who have dealt with retrieved extraterrestrial vehicles and bodies, is that some of these species appear to have descended from, for example, what we would call bird-like creatures that become, instead of flying, are two-legged, two-arm, and a head, but are kind of feathery. Others have encountered ones that appear to have a cetacean sort of quality to them, or a dolphin-like quality. Others have encountered some that appear to be almost like a two-arm, two-leg, and a head praying mantis type intelligent life form that are apparently incredibly intelligent and very gentle, but to someone who would have insect phobia would be kind of freaked out, and et cetera and so on. And so I think that there is the possibility that almost any phyla and any type of animal, in our case, of course, it was primates and what have you, could evolve and have perhaps some augmentation of their development through some sort of mysterious intervention that would lead to an upright man or humanoid that would be from that lineage. That, in other words, we have a primate connection. Others could have a canine connection, or a cetacean connection, or a bird-like pathway, or some other pathway. Of course, it doesn't exist on this planet, but that is a type of animal life or life form that would evolve on other planets. And with that would bring their own qualities and attributes. And I think that any of them, of course, one could make the argument, might have some of the same problems humans have controlling their tendency towards violence, but the likelihood of them traveling interstellar with the level of technology that implies, which we'll get to in a moment, and remaining in a state of unchecked proclivities. In other words, it's one thing to have a capacity for violence, but if it's unchecked to the point of aggression and hostility, it's almost inconceivable that a life form would be able to not have blown itself up or encountered other life forms and blown themselves up long before they would get out of their own solar system, because there appears to be very much a cosmic order and a universal order where evolving planets are observed as Earth is being observed. And, there's a certain litmus test, a certain development in social consciousness and spiritual consciousness that's required before you're let out of your planet very far. I mean, obviously, we did go to the moon, contrary to some conspiracy theorists. It was the footage was hoax, but we in fact did go to the moon. But it isn't as if we're allowed to fly amongst the stars willy-nilly while we're still in the process of engaging in warfare on this planet as humans. And so I have called this the cosmic quarantine that appears to exist around any planet that has not yet become peaceful. And I have this on very good intelligence from people who have worked in the National Reconnaissance Office and the Defense Intelligence Agency who have told me of our attempts to use some very esoteric things that fly, the man-made UFOs, as it were, the alien reproduction vehicles, to go out into space where we have been not only tracked but at times turned away. And I'll never forget a meeting I had with an analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency who back, I believe in the 70s, was analyzing various photographs that were from satellites. And some of these photographs had pictures of ET spacecraft in them between where the satellite was in space and the Earth. But he also discovered that some of the satellites were turned away from Earth. We're not looking at the Soviet Union or China or someplace, but they were looking out into space. And he asked, what are these satellites imaging, looking away from the planet? And he was told they were looking for extraterrestrial vehicles, and that some of these had become developed enough that they were targeting and tracking and targeting ET craft in a certain sector of space, and that whenever they would try to do that, those satellite systems would be jammed and switched off or disabled by the ETs. And this was causing some consternation and aggravation within these sort of classified projects. I've heard this from more than one person, so I have high confidence that those sort of things have happened. And it isn't that the ETs were hostile, but they were not going to allow us to weaponize space to such an extent that this could really get out of control. And so I think this has created a great deal of tension, by the way, because we have managed the relationship between humans and these extraterrestrial civilizations very poorly, because it's all been through the lens of a sort of military defense posture rather than understanding why they might be here, and that perhaps the concern that exists in the cosmos is that humans have gone from horse and buggies and rifles in the last 100 years or so to space travel and hydrogen bombs and even more esoteric weapons in classified projects that are electromagnetic in nature and so-called scalar or longitudinal weapons. So I think that we really have to look at this, and this is why we really do need to form a council of wise elders on this planet to be involved in this whole question of interplanetary relations and looking at it in a much broader way than sort of a knee-jerk, reactionary military response, understanding that we do have these proclivities and that obviously if civilizations had the capacity to travel faster than the speed of light from one star system to this star system and to Earth, the likelihood that they would be hostile towards humanity and Earth, given the fact that we've been targeting them, we have downed dozens of these spacecraft, we have gone into space illegally within the classified world with weapons, et cetera and so on, that, if they had an intent that was hostile, it would have been point, set, match, and done with about 1945 when we detonated the first atomic weapon at the Trinity site, so in New Mexico. And I think this is why people need to think about this in a very broad view, is that while you can't prove a negative, many people say, well, can you prove that they're not? I said, well, you can never prove a negative. It's axiomatic. But what we can establish is that the Earth has not been attacked and invaded by these civilizations. On the other hand, we can prove that we have attacked them. So there is certainly a higher level of restraint and consciousness operating there, because with the technologies that they have at their disposal, if they wanted to kick the living daylights out of us, they could have done so and have not. And I think this is not only one of the surest proofs that that we're dealing with very developed societies that are in a higher level of social and spiritual awareness than we've yet attained collectively on Earth, but that we need to have people analyzing this whole situation with calmer minds than have been allowed to, because the people who have been allowed into the very small tent of these classified projects has been a self-selecting group of militarists and frankly, warmongers. And I think this is something we really need to correct.
Well, you've often said before that humanity's technological prowess has far exceeded our spiritual growth, and in fact, there have been other civilizations on Earth that have not survived.
Yes, I mean, there's great evidence. In fact, there's a man that works with these classified projects as a senior physicist who has analyzed very ancient artifacts. The intelligence community will bring to him ancient artifacts that are from tens of thousands of years ago or longer that were clearly pre-existed the current known historic societies, on Earth that only goes back, of course, a few thousand years that we know of, and that these societies apparently developed to a certain point and then imploded, probably because they reached the point where we are now, doing great damage to the biosphere or to each other through weapon systems. And there's some people who believe when they read the ancient Vedas of, since we're on the World Puja Network, and pujas are part of the ceremonies from the Vedas, when they're read carefully, there's some evidence for, of course, not only the vimanas, which are things that fly around that one could say to be like modern UFOs, but that there may have been some great wars in the past, in great antiquity, that used what sound like nuclear weapons or weapons, some kind of weapon of mass destruction. And so this is something where, of course, there may be very scant record of these other civilizations that have existed, that have risen and fallen into obscurity. And I think we're at this crossroads as well, where we're going to have to decide to either live together as a peaceful civilization, not only on Earth, but also in the heavens and in space, or we'll go the way of those who have come before us. And I think that this is the great challenge of this time. It's not just world peace, it's universal peace, because the only thing worse than the current situation is that we would become a unified world civilization hell-bent on engaging in sort of a interplanetary war, which is what Douglas MacArthur called for and predicted in his last speech to the Congress in the 1960s, where he said World War III will be interplanetary. So this has been discussed and planned since the 50s and 60s, albeit some of it's been hidden in plain sight, such as the congressional record, and other things have been done very covertly. But it's out there, and I think that this is why we need people who are enlightened and have a calmer view of this to rise up and say, wait just a minute, let's take a moment and look at this. And let's set in place some policies, but also some initiatives to contact these interstellar civilizations with the correct approach, peaceful, without prejudice, without fear, and using the right cosmology and paradigm. And that is exactly what CSETI, CSETI.org, is doing through our Ambassador to the Universe program, is that we are training people beginning this weekend. We're going to be on an island in the Gulf of Mexico doing this with about 45 or 50 people, but we do this every few months. And what our focus really is about is training people in the techniques of contact, but also the kind of cosmological perspective as opposed to a purely anthropocentric perspective. It's just human-centered of what we need to understand to make contact, why these ET civilizations may be here, and what kind of understanding of the cosmos is needed to open contact and understand how the contact might happen. Because one of the real problems, of course, any idiot can understand if an extraterrestrial vehicle fully materializes and lands in your backyard, and a materialized humanoid of some type walks up to your back door and shakes hands. This is the least likely way that's going to happen, however. And in reality, these extraterrestrial civilizations usually stay at a resonant frequency that they reside in when they're traveling amongst the stars faster than the speed of light, but even when they're hovering in the atmosphere of Earth or in your backyard, they can be in that same resonant frequency that is shifted beyond the speed of matter, electrons, and light. And what that means is that they could be right in front of you, and you wouldn't know it unless you know what to look for. And that's really a lot of training to understand what do you look for, how do you make contact, and then what happens when they do fully materialize, which we've had happen. And you can then image the vehicle or the beings. Now, I'm transitioning a little bit to what we're going to talk about next week, because we're going to release a photograph of an ET being that was within a few feet of our group at Joshua Tree National Park a couple of months ago. And this is going to be released, although there's some controversy about releasing this because it's explosive. But stay tuned, World Puja Network. Next time we're going to talk about it, and we will have these images up on our website.
You know, speaking of Joshua Tree, I also want to mention that that this very topic of our humanity taking this quantum leap of transition into a higher spiritual development is exactly the message, one of the messages that we all received through the Orion transmissions at Joshua Tree that you were able to translate.
Right, exactly.
And you had said, which is so important, is that our development corresponds with the development of other planets in the whole universe, and that when we take this quantum leap, the whole universe takes a quantum leap with us.
That's correct, and there are many worlds at our level of development, and we're in a universal moment, not just a global moment. And this is what people don't seem to quite understand, the significance of this cycle we're in. We're in a cycle that is a universal cycle. It is not just an Earth cycle, and it's one that only comes around about every 450 to 500,000 Earth years, and that is a big mega cycle. And that's why we're in a time of enormous transition and change. But we're on the other side of it. Rather than slinking into obscurity, such as Atlantis or Lemuria or Mu or these other civilizations that have existed on Earth in the past and vanished, we are going to make it to the other side of this transition and be in an unbroken cycle of development in higher states of consciousness and technology for 500,000 unbroken years. And think about that. It's amazing to think about where we're going to be at the end of that 500,000-year period. So that's why this period we're in right now is so pregnant. And as Earth makes this transition, it's going to have a non-local morphogenic field effect cosmically throughout the entirety of the universe. It was very important to contemplate that the implications of what happens on Earth, it's not like we're just isolated out here cold in one little corner of the universe. That's true only if you have a reductionist, materialistic, linear view of reality. If you understand that the whole cosmos is a conscious quantum hologram, and that what happens on Earth has amazing ramifications and immediate ramifications for worlds that are thousands, millions, even billions of light years away from Earth, then you understand how important it is that we get this right. Right.
Profound.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the truth of the time we're in. And that's also why, I think there's enormous interest by these other civilizations, some of which I think have been involved with observing the development of humanity for thousands, if not millions of years, and are sort of the guardian civilizations over this planet. And this is we have contact frequently with those civilizations and beings, and they're not just from this galaxy, by the way. The being that appeared at Joshua Tree that was photographed, we're pretty sure is from a star system in the Andromeda galaxy, which is the nearest galaxy to the Milky Way, but it's 2.5 million light years from here. That's the distance a beam of light going at 186,000 miles every second would reach in 2.5 million years. That's how far away that is. So, but of course, they're not traveling at the speed of light. They're traveling at the speed of consciousness and thought, and so-called etheric and astral transdimensional technologies, and yet, they know that we're at this point in a sort of a crossroads for humanity where we have to learn how to live together peacefully and go into space only in peace, and reach also a new level of consciousness and spiritual awareness in order to survive and overcome our own primal proclivities that too often bring us into violence and warfare, which, it's one thing when you're running around with rocks and spears or even with muskets and cannons, but when you're running around with thermonuclear weapons and scalar weapons and things of this sort, it's an existential threat to not only humanity but to the Earth. And I think that this is why we're at this really critical junction in our development, and why, in understanding where we're headed, we need to understand that it's not just has implications for humanity and Earth, but has implications for the entire cosmos.
You mentioned the guardian beings that we've had frequent contact with, actually at all of our sites where we've done sea study expeditions, but one of our recent contacts with these guardian beings was at the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We interacted with the beings that were guardians of the ocean off that area.
Yeah, that was a beautiful experience. It started actually in 2008 with that contact. And as you recall, I don't know, by the way, those of you who are interested, we're going to do a gathering, and it's open to people who want to register for this. It's going to be in April, from the 11th to the 17th of April. And we go out on these barrier islands out in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of North Carolina called the Outer Banks. And we stay in one of these gigantic oceanfront houses, and that's where we have our meetings during the day. And then we go out on one of the wildlife refuge beaches that's about 15 minutes away at night. And we have had some amazing things that have happened there. When we were there I guess it was about 9 or 10 months ago, in late April, early May of 2009. And by the way, this is in the book that just came out called Contact, Countdown to Transformation, which when you get that at disclosureproject.org, you also get a free DVD that has all the images and tones and sounds that we've recorded during our contact experiences. That last year when we were there in 2009, we had on the very first night sort of an almost unbelievable series of things that happened. We went out on this beach with a whole group of people. There were 25 completely new people who'd never done this before. And we had dinner all together and had around sunset, and then gone out at around 8 or 8:30 at night. And we were on the beach, and suddenly we noticed in the west and northwest, extending out over the ocean to the northeast, dozens of scintillating, looked like strobe lights, but they were not planes, out in space. They were outside the atmosphere, setting up some kind of force, and it was like this huge sort of gathering of craft. And we actually have this filmed, and some of it's on this DVD I mentioned that comes with this new book, Contact, a Countdown to Transformation, that really chronicles the last 17 years or so of our contact work. Well, when that was happening, I was describing to the group that was there something that had happened the previous year in 2008, when a very unusual sort of matte black manta ray type shaped craft came out of the ocean and flew over the dune above where we were gathered and sitting in a circle, and flew overhead. Just maybe
right overhead, like 15, 20 feet overhead.
Yeah, it was like right above us, and then literally dematerialized in thin air as maybe 100 yards or 50 yards from us as it was headed towards the northwest. And we were told then that these were the ETs that were in the ocean, that were examining what was happening to the continental shelf, and of course we're killing most of the fish and wildlife of the oceans all over the world. And they were studying this, and it was a scientific team, and we had been doing some meditations for the healing of the earth, and specifically joining with them in the healing of the oceans, using consciousness and prayer and meditation. And this was their acknowledging our effort. Well, as I was telling this story to the group last year, and I was pointed to the south and southeast of us, where this manta ray-shaped craft came up out of the ocean and flew over us, at that instant, there was an object that came from space, from the west. It was in the southern part of the sky. And if you visualize, hold your thumb and index finger out and spread the fingers, the thumb and the index finger apart about 3 or 4 inches. It was that big, at arm's length. Now, if you look at a jet in the sky or even a plane very close, that is huge. It came in at a sort of 45-degree angle and came in, and it would be brilliantly lit. And there were about 16, 17 people who saw this who were looking in that direction. It would be fully materialized and then dematerialize, and then it would be a little closer to the ocean and then rematerialize and dematerialize, and they back and forth like that 3 or 4 times until it actually went into the ocean right off the shore from where we were staying, and it was breathtaking. And then a few moments later, we noticed this weird, strange sort of energy fluxing field of light that was all around us on the beach. Very subtle, but palpable. And the temperature rose as if we were in some kind of etheric bubble that was translucent, but it was an energy field. And then towards the ocean from our location, about 90 feet from us, right above the sand, were 3 brilliant lights that would come on and off in sequence, and that happened for an hour, seen by everyone, and it is videotaped with our cameras. And it's very unusual, but it was right there on the Outer Banks in late April, early May. I forget the date now.
We stepped it up. It was only 90 feet from the edge of our group circle.
Yeah, it was literally 90 feet from us.
Right on.
And it was, of course, ET beings that were manifesting and demanifesting as these points of light in this ship that was shifted faster than the speed of light that emerged out of the ocean. It was the same one that all of us saw go into the ocean a few moments earlier, but of course it was staying in a very stealth mode because we were, you're only 10 minutes as the jet flies from the big naval and Air Force and military facilities there in Norfolk, Virginia, and also in North Carolina. And we know that when we've had these craft fully materialized, that we've had jets scrambled in and all kinds of weapon systems activated. And, we're at a point in our history where what we're doing is obviously not being done in a vacuum. It's being observed and it's being monitored. But this was a very safe way that they engaged, and many people had some amazing consciousness, and I hate to use the word telepathic, but thought images from these beings, because this went on for an hour where we were physically seeing them and also filming them. And this is on this DVD that you get when you get this book that just was released this fall called Contact, Countdown to Transformation, which has this account and hundreds of others from around the world. And it was interesting for me because with 25 people there who were completely new to all of this, here this very bizarre and rapidly unfolding encounter was happening. And it was wonderful, though, because everyone got it. Not only did everyone see it, but everyone understood it. And it was just absolutely beautiful.
It was amazing. And then,
so we're going to do this again in April 11th to 17th this year. And if you want to join us there, God only knows what will happen this year. But it seems to be a building crescendo of contact and events happening. And you're welcome to look into it. It's at you can find out about this at cseti.org. That's cseti.org. And this expedition, as well as the others for 2010, are all listed there on the website. So the reason it's so important for people to be trained in doing this, by the way, is not just the understanding of how these ETs are manifesting, but how to make contact. These are not random events. We are setting up the conditions where we're using a specific set of contact protocols to invite the ETs to come, vector them onto the site using consciousness and remote viewing techniques, but also laser systems, and then electromagnetic detection systems. We have magnetometers, we have laser detectors, radar detectors, electromagnetic field meters, various type of cameras now that we're learning how to use to image these things in different spectra, and et cetera, and so on. So it's of course a growing experience for us. We learn something new every time we do this, but it's also creating a morphogenic field for universal peace. That when you have 40 people out on a beach going into deep meditation for the healing of the earth and the creation of a peaceful world here, and then seeing these ET civilizations and inviting them here in that spirit of universal peace, it actually is creating the momentum and the morphogenic field for the future, where our planet will be in open contact with these other civilizations peacefully, and we'll be going amongst the stars together. So we're literally manifesting that future by doing this together. And it's much more powerful if you have 30 or 40 people doing it than if I do it by myself or Linda and I do it by ourselves. There is an exponential, not additive. It's not just arithmetic. It's actually exponential growth in the power that consciousness has when people collectively do this together in a coherent and unified way. And that's the beauty of what we're doing. It's very Vedic, but it's also very post-quantum physics in the understanding of the conscious universe and these concepts of Rupert Sheldrake with morphogenic fields and many other physicists who have written about the quantum sort of holographic conscious universe, and that we're using that knowledge and the ancient knowledge of the Vedas. And we always, by the way, do a puja. So one of the beautiful things about what we do at the Outer Banks is that because we're at this beautiful, huge house right on the ocean, direct ocean front, we do this puja, facing the ocean with everyone, and where we then share the mantras that people can learn to get into the resonant field together so they can go into deep, higher states of consciousness and deep sonic consciousness, and then we train them how to remote view deep space and these ET civilizations and connect to them and guide them into our location to make contact using coherent thought. And by the way, the meditation technique as well as the technique for vectoring and guiding the ETs onto a site are also available at the website disclosureproject.org. These have all been made. People can get them. And if you can't come to one of these expeditions, because not everyone on Earth can, we only do these 4 or 5 times a year, and they're limited in number of people that we take. But you can learn and do it yourself. And in fact, we've heard from many people who have gotten the books and gotten this new book, Countdown to Transformation, and these other meditation CDs, and they'll go out and do this with a group of friends who are like-minded people, and they'll have amazing contact and sightings happen. And we want thousands of people to start doing this, because imagine when thousands of people start anything like this that's dealing with powerful techniques and consciousness, how much it can move the planet from the current trajectory of conflict and even weaponizing space and approaching this issue in a sort of ridiculous Neanderthal way of thinking, and to an enlightened way of responding and creating a peaceful future together with these extraterrestrial civilizations. That when you have thousands of people doing that, and we've trained thousands of people and others, so it just has a huge transformative effect. Plus, it's a hell of a lot of fun. I have to say, it's just really a lot of fun to go out under the stars and do this. And we have night vision cameras and night vision scopes and all these sort of things, and to see how the ETs literally materialize around us very rapidly, and then will vanish, and all the different kinds of manifestations. I mean, it goes from electronic tones that float through the circle to musical tones to a Joshua tree. There was a group of ETs that were dematerialized, but they let them voices be heard, and everyone heard this group of ETs talking right outside our circle. And then a few moments later, a photograph was taken of one of them floating above the chairs to the east of us. I mean, you're going to see this photograph soon because we're about ready to release it. It's going to blow your mind when you see it. And so what we're saying is that it's amazing how this happens, and to experience it is exciting and enthralling and beautiful, and nothing frightening about it. I tell people, some people go, "Oh, I'd be so afraid." I said, "Of what? You should be more afraid walking through your city because of all the murderers and thugs and rapists out there." We have been doing this for now 19, 20 years all over the world, and we have never, ever had anything but a wonderful experience. And I tell people that's a longitudinal experience I'll match to anybody's fear-mongering about alien invasion.
Well, the ETs, you can tell how generous they are, and they're tuned into our emotions, and they're tuned into us personally. As Dr. Greer says, that when they show themselves, it is absolutely not by random. And just one little bitty story to illustrate is last year when we were at the Outer Banks, there was a man there who had been to the previous Joshua Tree expedition. He was from Canada, and at the Joshua Tree expedition we had such amazing Orion transmissions coming through our radar detectors. So he had bought a radar detector and traveled from Canada to come to this Outer Banks training, only had flight problems, and he missed that first night where we had this light on the beach and craft on the beach flashing at us for over an hour. And so he had asked the ETs in his mind to please do something with his radar detector, because he had missed this other encounter. And that whole week in the Outer Banks, the only sound we heard out of a radar detector that whole week was from his, and he had it between his legs sitting on his chair, and it went off in about a 6-second burst the first night he was there.
I know it. And this, we've seen this sort of thing happen before, where there's just an amazing level of compassion, and they're wanting to include everyone in the experience. And this man was so pure-hearted, and he had been, I think, at one other expedition, I think in the last year. But he did miss that first night where all of these things happened. And I know that they were doing this to say, we're connected to you also. And because we had other detectors out there that were completely silent,
right,
except for his. And it was very clear that there was some electromagnetic lock-on, and he knew it. And it was just a very sweet way of them saying, you're not being forgotten either. So, and then, of course, many other sightings and events happen through the week. But, we have many things that fly overhead and, at different altitudes, and then we'll have things that will move around us. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention when we were on the Outer Banks is that towards the end of all of this, with these lights that were, we filmed it in this nightscope camera, which turns everything sort of a greenish color. If you've ever looked through a nightscope lens, they can kind of create this color. But with the naked eye, they were various colors. There was a teal green one, and there was a golden one, and there was a white light.
Right.
And these were, I'm quite convinced, separate ET entities that were in this sort of energy field that you could see and feel, that was this craft that was resonating and phasing faster than the speed of light, but that was creating this energy effect all around us on the beach. When I walked into exactly where those beams were at the end, I literally, slightly to my right and above me, there was this burst of light, and I walked in, and I went into a state of consciousness. It's very hard to describe, but it was very emotional, where I knew that if I wanted to, I could leave and go with them off this planet, but that I wasn't supposed to yet. And it was kind of sad. I mean, not sad. It was sort of poignant, but very powerful and very emotional and beautiful. And interestingly, people who were behind me kind of saw me disappear.
Right. Right, you did. It was like you were engulfed by an energy field, either obscured by that or you were fading into the energy. Right.
And some, they could just sort of obviously became almost not visible or translucent.
Right.
Although, I certainly thought I was still very much physically here, but I was in this area that caused this sort of spatial shift and energy shift. It was very powerful and profound.
And it was the next day that you and I were walking on the beach, and we saw that craft, it looked like an island in the Atlantic.
Oh, my God, I forgot all about that. Yeah, I mean,
it was so
yeah,
huge.
This was one of the strangest things I've ever seen. You want to tell them what it looked like?
Well, I'm from California, and it's like, and if you've been to Hawaii, the same kind of thing where you're standing on the beach, and you look out into the ocean, and in the distance you see an island. It's Catalina or one of the Hawaiian islands you're seeing from another one. I mean, it totally looks like a landmass sticking up above the ocean in the distance on the horizon.
Yeah, but it was sort of flat on top.
Yeah, this one was really elongated. It was like, basically what it was the top of a saucer-shaped craft, and
right.
It was not very high above the horizon, but it was extremely distinct, just as though you were looking at an island.
Yes,
and
I mean, if you hold the arms at arm's length, it was sticking up like an inch or inch and a half above the water, and it was sort of a gunmetal gray and sort of etheric, and then it was flat, slightly curved, flat on top, but had very distinct edges.
Right.
So it began and ended, and it sort of followed us as we walked along the beach, and neither of us had a camera. Ironically, there was a man from Ireland who was at the Outer Banks last year who did have a camera. He saw it, and because he wasn't familiar with the geology and geography of the area, thought it was an island out there because he didn't know. And, of course, there are none. I mean, you're on the barrier final air, the next island is Bermuda, which you could never see from the Outer Banks. It's out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But around that time, there was a black disk that he had that flew right in front of him and then went along the beach and into the water, sort of a foot or two circular black disc. And it happened too quickly from the film, and I think they were trying to tell him, no, it's us. But he had a camera, but he didn't take a picture. But anyway, as we saw this, and it was fascinating because immediately after we noted it, there were all these jets that were scrambled out of Norfolk
right.
that came down and were circling exactly that area. It went down beneath the surface of the ocean.
Right.
But then the area was just absolutely buzzing with fighter jets. And in fact, we had a couple of them that came within 100 to 200 feet above the roof of our house, which is against FAA regs.
Right.
If you remember, I mean, it was like, holy
I do.
God. And if you look also on the DVD that goes with this new Contact book, Countdown to Transformation, Contact, that Raven Nabulsi had asked the ETs to connect to her awareness, and she has a camera that she would just, even if she didn't really see anything with her naked eye, she would feel it and take a picture. And that she got a picture of this disc craft right off from our house, exactly where we're going to be this April, from the 11th to the 17th. And it was broad daytime, and she got a picture of this disc right off of the coast, not far from our house, in her photograph. And that's actually also on this DVD that goes with the book. So I think that this is all very educational for people to see and to realize that this is the level of daily activity that happens. But we're not doing it in a vacuum. Unfortunately, we're doing it at this time on planet Earth, where there's a great deal of not only military reconnaissance, but attempts to suppress these sort of events. And, some people say, well, why don't you go to the Amazon jungle? And I said, well, there's huge Raytheon and classified programs in the Amazon jungle, and they do the same stuff there. So it's not as if, the technologies that exist within this so-called Majestic or Magi group that runs these classified projects isn't global. They are certainly global, and so, we do it wherever we wish to do it. And we just adjust accordingly for these kinds of events that can happen. Well, what we found is that it doesn't at all. It may change how the manifestation of the ETs happen, but it never stops us from having contact. And particularly once you understand that you're dealing with trans-dimensional civilizations, that even though they have physical bodies and physical spacecraft, their technologies cross into the so-called etheric and astral energies that are faster than the speed of light, interfacing with thought forms and consciousness and orbs and things of this sort. And they can only do so much. Just they can't suppress all that. So, once you understand the cosmology, which we've described very fully in this new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, and you understand the techniques for making contact, basically they can't do anything about it. And so we just go ahead about our business. Someday it won't be an issue because we'll finally, have the world understand that we don't need to be taking a military stance in this area. But right now we have to live with the realities of the world that we have. So
that's right.
That is what we're working to change.
So we've about come to the end of our discussion today, but we do want to mention that you can follow us on Twitter now.
That's right. You want to tell them about that, how they do that?
The easiest way probably is just go to cseti.org, our website, and scroll down, and on the left you'll see the Follow Us on Twitter button, and go ahead and click it and sign up to follow us.
Right. And it's very important because there's so many breaking events happening with the energy projects we're doing, with this scientist who is working with us now, who's worked in a lot of very sensitive projects and who has now been cleared to work with us and is working right now on building these new energy systems with these sort of a crescendo of contact events happening. So I would recommend that, you sign up for the Twitter, and that way when there's a breaking event or a news bulletin, you'll get it right away. So that's a great idea, and thank you, Linda, for setting all that up for us.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, again, thank you all for listening, and until next time, thank you to the World Puja Network for hosting us. This is Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and I've been joined by Linda Willitts, and I really appreciate everyone's help and support, and hope to see you soon out under the stars on one of these exciting expeditions.
Right.
Have a good day.